Surveys are some of the most common research methods you've been exposed to, but that doesn't mean that you've seen them done well. So let's start with what are we even talking about? Well, this is really just the tool or process we use to have respondents respond to questions. So I have a series of questions I want answered about people's attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, values, and so on, and I simply ask them. It is one of the most direct methods of getting the information we want, and it can be one of the most efficient, and we'll talk about some of the ways that is needed. The times when we use surveys is when we just don't know the answer and we need new information. Maybe something has changed and we want to see how people have responded, or we're not sure what people's opinions are, and so we simply have to go find out what their opinions are. The reason why we would turn to this is because the people who we are studying know how they feel about things better than we do. And so I could make a guess and I could be wrong, or I could simply go ask. And so that's what surveys are designed to do. Now, there are some important concepts that make surveys work. The first, it has to do with sampling. So the sample in a survey is a subset of the total population. So as you can see from the image, the sample is just a group of people taken from the overall potential population. Now, what makes this work is this idea of randomization. It is just as likely for any individual in the population to be in the sample. If that is the case, then it doesn't matter which individuals you pull from this population to be in your sample. So if the population is 20,000 people, you're not going to get 20,000 people to respond to your survey. Maybe you can get 200. Now, if we truly randomly pull those people out of that total population of 20,000, then those 200 should be representative of that population. Therefore, any survey we take of our sample should represent the population. Now, there's lots of things, and granted, this is a long list of creating a survey, and so I'm just going to highlight them because some of these steps are straightforward. Some of them take a little bit more work. But we always should start with a theoretical reason why we're asking the question. It's not just you got curious one day. There should be something guiding the kinds of questions that you're answering, the kinds of variables, the relationships among them that allow you to develop some hypotheses or research questions. There should be a reason why you're asking about certain variables. Then you have to consider, should you write your own questions or should you use someone else's questions? And then how you distribute the survey. How is this done? And then making sure that the survey that you have is clear, deciding on a research collection method. Are you going to do this online, in person? How are you going to do it? Maybe you want to pilot test the survey. You want to give it to a couple of people and see if it makes sense. Does it work? Then you actually have to go get the data. So a lot of people think a survey is just like, oh, I just go write some questions and I just hand them to people and they answer it. I mean, in theory, it is that simple, but it's also not. There's a lot of rhyme and reason as to why you ask certain things. So let's get into that, shall we? So the theoretical frame, right? The big idea that's guiding your question. What are you studying? Why would you ask questions? So in your homework assignment, I had you write some questions, and there wasn't really much guiding some of your questions. You just had to ask some questions. And you might have found that in some cases it was hard to come up with questions because why would I ask this? And that's exactly why theoretical frame is useful. What phenomena are you interested in studying? What is it that you want to know? What are the variables of interest? How do they interact with each other according to the literature? What does the theory or the model describe? Those are the things you would then go ask questions about. So once you know what that theoretical frame is, that allows you to develop some questions or hypotheses. And survey research is deductive, so that means that we are starting from the big idea and going down to the specifics. So if you have the big idea, this is how these two variables interact, When I add gasoline to fire, it burns, right? That's established. So if I am going to go ask you about adding gasoline to fire, do you think that that happens? Do you think that it burns? Then that's the survey question. So the survey questions are born out of the variables. So the survey is designed to measure the variables. It's not designed to measure your big idea. The big idea is, how are these things related? Then I have to go measure these things. What are the things? What are the variables? What are the pieces? What are the components? I want to break it down into its individual pieces and ask about those. Then I can talk about how they're related because I've actually measured them. So one of the things I mentioned is, should you create your own questions or use pre-existing questions? Well, creating a new instrument involves quite a bit of statistical analysis. You would think it'd be so simple as just go ask a question, right? But certain variables require a lot of questions to ask. For example, there is a measure to ask, how much do you like to think about things? It's called need for cognition. And this has, I believe, 36 questions to ask if you like to think. So if I just asked you, do you like to think about things? And you answered that on a 1 to 7 scale, it wouldn't actually be very accurate, because most people would be like, no, I don't like to think. But that question that you would have written wouldn't actually measure the thing that you wanted to measure. But instead, the questions that are in the tool that exists are getting around it in a way with questions that you might not have thought of. So if you're going to use pre-existing measures, take some caution. The choice should be based on theory. It's not just, oh, this is short. Shorter isn't always better. Sometimes it takes precision, and precision takes time, and it takes lots of details. The instrument should be reliable and valid. It should be something that's been used by others. You might look for a measure that seems to be consistently used in studies on a particular topic. Well, if this is the thing that is measuring how pretty a unicorn is, then that's how I'm going to measure how pretty a unicorn is, whatever the variable of interest might be. So there are two ways that surveys tend to be distributed, paper and online. Paper surveys used to be the only way to do it. You would literally print it on a piece of paper and hand it to someone. Sometimes this would be given in a face-to-face situation. Sometimes we would simply hand them out and have people take them home, or we would mail them, or we would even do it over the phone. This used to be quite common. We'd dinner time get interrupted and someone would say, can I ask you a few questions about how the government is da-da-da-da-da-da, and you'd have to answer those questions. The benefit of these is you hand it to someone and they're going to do it. And you don't get handed a lot of paper things. Oftentimes you can go to where people are and simply hand it out to them, and then you collect it. There is something about having people read a piece of paper and mark them down that they take a little bit more seriously. They tend not to get distracted. The downside is, right, you've got to haul that paper with you and you've got to go to the people. And sometimes it's hard to get people to agree. Web-based surveys, obviously, are used quite frequently. They are entirely online. You can get more data collected quickly online. Websites like SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, Google Forms are an easy way to distribute surveys. The pro is that you can get a lot of data very cheaply, very quickly. The downside to that is you get cheap data. Sometimes people will not really pay attention to the questions because they click on stuff all the time and they're just clicking 44444 for everything, and they get credit for having done the survey. The other downside is that we are inundated with so many online surveys that people are likely to say no. There has to be some sort of compensation for people or some real reason why they want to answer those questions. So while it can get you a lot of data, a lot of people aren't paying attention. And when someone does a paper survey and you think this is going to take 10 minutes, they're going to take 10 minutes or less to fill it out. Sometimes you give someone a web-based survey, they start doing it, and then they get distracted, and they come back, and they do a little bit more, and they come back, and sometimes it's completed over 3 days' time. They're not really paying attention to the questions at that point, are they? You need your survey to be clear, and one of the things that people overlook is having good instructions. You can't just say, here are questions. You have to tell them what you want them to do. If I'm asking you to consider being in a situation, if I'm having you consider a brand, or if I'm having you consider, I want you to think about your feelings during this time or your thoughts during this time. You have to tell them. And when you have questions that are category related, you have to be sure that you are providing both sides, right? You are giving balanced categories, the good and the bad, the high and the low, and that you are exhaustive. You want to make sure that if you are bothering to limit people's answer options, that you are including all of the possible answer options. Any decision you make to exclude options means that is data you are not accurately capturing, because people will select something, but only because they feel like they have to select something, and that may not be accurate. Now, when you actually get to writing the questions, you can mess these up in a lot of ways, it turns out. One is having too much jargon. Just be clear. Use the simplest words possible. Don't use slang. Don't use terminology that wouldn't be familiar to the average person, right? You have a sample of 20 or a population of 20,000 people, and you randomly pull people out. You're going to get an 85-year-old grandparent, and you're going to get a 19-year-old college student. Are they going to read the same question the same way? That's what you want to make sure that you are doing. You want to avoid double-barreled questions. Don't ask two questions in one sentence. Do you like pizza or herding puppies? Strongly agree to strongly disagree. Wait, what? I only like one of those. How do I answer that question, right? You don't want to ask leading question. So as a terrible person, do you like pizza? Wait, what? I'm not a terrible, why would you include that in there? So you don't include judgments in your questions, double negatives and overlapping, unbalanced question. Your questions should be as simple as possible. There's only one way to interpret the question. There's only one kind of answer that people are providing. If you are including or, it's just a different way to define a thing. So you want to make sure that you are only including the necessary information for people to be able to understand the question. So important questions, sort of surface level things to think about. Who are the participants? Who are you asking? Why are you asking that group of people? Does it matter which person ends up in the sample? Could it be literally anyone, or is there a subset of the overall population that you are interested in? How are you going to gather the data? Some of that will depend on your sample. So if your sample is something that is geographically close, you might choose an in-person data collection because you can actually access them. But if your sample is something that's spread out across multiple states, well, you're not going door to door and handing out pieces of paper, right? You're going to go with a web-based design. And then are you doing something that is a one-shot or a longitudinal design? And so what that means is a one-shot or a cross-sectional design in which you have all of the population and you literally take a snapshot in time. So I'm going to ask these questions once, and I'm going to feel satisfied that my answer to those questions is enough. Or do you want a longitudinal design? Are you curious about, is your question about how these things change over time? So I might ask you at age 10 and at age 15 and at 20 and 25 and 30 because I think your answers are going to significantly change over time. And so I need to ask you at those times. Or maybe I ask you at simply two particular points in time, right? So does your attitude about alcohol change as you go through college. I might ask you in your freshman year, then ask you in your senior year. When you actually get your data, you want to make sure that it's all accurate, that the answers are lining up to the questions, that things aren't typed in, that if you allow people to write in answers, that it's understandable. If you're doing paper surveys, you have to sit down and type in all of those numbers, double check what you had, and then you get to the analysis phase, which we'll talk about later on. Now, surveys. Why bother? So I know I just did a great job of selling them, right? It makes it seem more cumbersome than it really is. The two primary reasons are cost and speed. These can be done free or no cost. You can get answers quickly. You can get a lot of people quickly. Those are clear advantages. That's what I want. I want a lot of people, and I want it quickly. I can get to people in places in ways that I can't necessarily. I can distribute it in lots of ways. Having standardized questions is ideal. In an interview, I might adjust my wording a little bit depending on the people that I'm talking to. I might rephrase it in a way that I didn't in another situation. I want to know how 200 people respond to this question. You get the same question. It's the exact same way. And so if I get standardized questions, I can have reliable results. I can compare across people because they answer the same question. And that allows me to make some more generalizable results. I can make claims about the population because everyone gave me the same kind of data because they answered the exact same questions. Now, what they don't do is they don't allow me to focus on context. So I am not going to be interested in a particular location, or I'm not always going to be focused on organizations or health. I can ask some health-specific questions, but I'm measuring the entire person. They're pretty inflexible. If I'm, these questions are supposed to be the same across individuals, and so you can't take it to another group and you start changing the wording, and then you have to ask, am I really asking the same questions anymore? You really do need a large population or a large sample. If my population is 20,000 and I ask 20 people, I don't really have a good picture of 20,000 people based on 20. I really have to up that number. And so there is a little bit of a sample demand when we start thinking about surveys. You really do need to ask a lot of people in order to get an accurate idea of your population. The last real limitation is that there is a social desirability bias. People tend to answer surveys the way they think we want them to answer them. So if I'm asking you, are you a good person? They might think I think they're trying to see how, good of a person I am. So I'll say I'm a really good person. But also, people don't want to always admit to, not being a good person or admitting to doing things that are unpleasant, even when anonymous. So there is a little bit of how honest our people are going to be on a survey. It's not that people aren't honest, but on a scale of 1 to 7, how terrible of a person are you? I'm not going to go, I'm 7. I'm the worst. I'm a 5. I'm not the greatest, but you really are a 7, and that's what I was hoping to capture. So that's the overall picture of surveys. There's more to it than meets the eye, kind of like the Transformers, and it can be a really powerful tool when done well and when done properly. It's just not always done that way.